But I want to start off by just clarifying something. Most of you don't know what a tag question is, do you? A tag question. No? You use tag questions all the time, don't you? What? Tag. T-A-G, as in you're it. A tag question. All right, I've already given you 2 examples of them, haven't I? That's the third. When you make a question by making a statement and then putting the opposite flick at the end of that phrase. This is a tag question, isn't it? We all see it now, don't we? All right, we use them all the time, but I have to tell you that I never considered them until I actually had to teach them to foreigners. And if anybody's ever tried to learn English as a foreign language, tag questions are absolutely infuriating, aren't they? I know. We're native speakers. It seems so natural to us. We know what we want to say. If I say, "You don't eat roadkill, do you?" the correct answer would be, no, right? But that's kind of bizarre, because the original sentence was, "You don't eat roadkill." And it sounds like I am asking you to confirm the validity of that sentence or to disaffirm the validity of that sentence. And yet what you actually end up having to do is to affirm or deny the opposite version of it that's contained in that tag at the end. The first might be in the negative, and the tag will always then be in the positive. And that means if you agree with the negative, you have to answer positive, and if you agree with the positive, you have to answer negative. It doesn't make a lot of sense, except if you're a native speaker, in which case it's so perfect, isn't it? Yeah. And that kind of mixed signal, if we're not 100% sure what's being asked of us, of whether we're supposed to agree with one part or the other of the sentence, is a big problem when it comes to Torah. And I'm not trying to criticize the author, but there are some elements of Torah that do seem to be pulling in opposite directions, aren't there? Well, in particular, I want to talk about the topic of being zealous. Zeal is held up as an ideal within the Torah. We get examples of the zealousness of Avraham when he was up early in the morning to saddle his donkey to prepare for the Akedah. He didn't let the servants do it. He didn't wait until the day was already begun. He was up, crack of dawn, out there, and this is held up to his credit, that he was zealous to perform this mitzvah that God had commanded him. Likewise, he was zealous to step up and to confront God about the issues of Sodom and Gomorrah, and to challenge what he saw as being a questionable decision. He was not going to shrink back. He was not going to wait. He was not going to delay. We see zealousness when we get to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, our teacher. He is zealous when he steps up again, like Abraham, to challenge God about not destroying the Jewish people multiple times, because we had messed up catastrophically multiple times. But we also see his zealousness in a negative light, when he is so zealous that he smacks the rock when it was unrequired, and by doing so insults not only the nation, but God, and completely ruins his opportunity to be a long-term leader for the people into this next stage of their movement. We see the zealousness of Pinchas. Pinchas, who saw the flagrant violation of Torah, the use of sexual activity in order to engage in idolatrous worship at the very threshold of the Mishkan, and took matters into his own hand with the spear through the lovers, if that's the right word. But, according to rabbinic understanding, while he was certainly rewarded for his zeal by becoming a Kohen, he was also castigated for having behaved in such an audacious and violent manner that there might have been a better solution, even if his heart might have been in the right place. So which is it? Does God want us to be zealous warriors? Does God not want us to be zealous? Does God want us to rise early like Abraham and head out to sacrifice our children? Or does God not want us to behave in that kind of zealous manner? Well, it's confusing, isn't it? The text seems to be telling us to do both and telling us to do neither. So what are we to make of this? Well, there's a simple rule of thumb that I think will help us understand. Because the Torah clearly wants passion. It wants zeal. It does not want us to treat our relationship with God and thus our relationship with the mitzvot and thus our relationship with the world as though it was some boring, mundane thing that didn't require any energy, any life flowing out from us, as something that could just be, pick it up, put it down, whatever, it's not a big deal. The Torah clearly does not want us to have that relationship with all that is holy. But the Torah is clearly concerned that our relationship might degenerate into, barbarism. We see in this Torah portion, as was chanted this morning by our great volunteers, the idea of having a city of refuge, an asylum city. Now, why were these needed? Because there was a zealous relative that said, hey, you there, who was chopping woods with my brother, with my uncle, and whose axe handle let loose with the head and killed my relative, you're going to pay for what you did, and would chase after them to murder them. That is to say, to take justice, they believed, into their own hands. Well, we can see that what God has done by telling us that these asylum cities are a requirement, because there is no accounting for the inability of people to control that passion, that zeal, that God is trying to tell us, look, if you want to know when to be zealous and when not to be zealous, when to be spontaneously passionate and when to double check what you're about to do, ask yourself, who am I doing this for? Who am I doing this for? If the answer is for someone else, and it's legitimate, then chances are you're probably in the right track. And if the answer is for myself, then chances are you are being persuaded by your own confirmation bias, your own personal self-interest. You are being persuaded by the areas of your mind that you are most blind to, and that will lead you astray because it's what you want to do. And we should always be suspicious of doing things we want to do zealously. It's the things we don't want to do that are the most easy to say we're probably on firmer ground when we choose to act with zeal. Let's take example of that rodef, that pursuer, coming after the person who has murdered their relative in their mind. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't this a clear example of them doing something for another person? After all, they are avenging the dead. How much more selfless could you possibly be? Really? Is that why vengeance was carried out with such reckless abandon throughout most of world history in most cultures? Was it because the dead were going to be brought back to life by the new blood that would be spilt? Was it because the dead would be healed? Because I killed their murderer? No. Vengeance was carried out throughout the world and is still practiced, unfortunately, in the modern times, because the living are afraid that if they don't act, they will be either condemned as a coward, condemned as one who didn't love the deceased, condemned as somebody who now will be taken advantage of because others do not fear them, because they have not acted with that murderous zeal. They don't take revenge for the dead. They take revenge for the dead for themselves, because they feel that it is something important to them. On the other hand, if we take Moses or Abraham arguing on behalf of the Jewish people or even on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, what did Moses have to gain by arguing on behalf of the Jewish people that God should not turn his back on us, but should instead overlook with some admonishment our mistakes and still maintain the covenant? In fact, Moses was operating at exactly his cross purposes. Moses was told, if I get rid of all of them, I'll take you and your family and make a new covenant. You will be the head of a new line. That's a pretty sweet deal. And yet Moses said, no, I will stand up for them. At the cost to myself, by any other standard throughout world history, at the loss of my status, at the loss of my opportunity to become the new scion of this massive people that would eventually replace the Jewish people, I will not. And indeed we see that Moses and his family become nothing in the Jewish people. There are no children of Moses and Moses' grandchildren and great-grandchildren who rise to prominence and fame within the Jewish people. Moses does his job, and he does it beautifully, and he himself does not gain from it. Again, exemplified in the story of Korah, where he points out that he has not benefited from anything that he has done. And so too with Abraham. What does Abraham have to gain by defending the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? This is part of the land that has been promised to him by the covenant of God. And these people are, by all accounts, and obvious to everyone in the region, bad. These are not good people. And yet, Abraham stands up for them. He has nothing to gain. He has everything to lose by defending them. And yet he feels he must risk it all in order to stand up for someone else. It's easy there to see that his zeal comes from the right source, from the right part of his heart. When we are riled up, we have to actually pump the brakes just once at least and say, why am I riled up? Am I riled up for someone else? Am I riled up for someone else in danger, in need, someone else that is being abused, oppressed, exploited? Am I riled up because what I am seeing is an injustice that affects more than just myself? Or, as is more often the case, am I angry because this has happened to me? Am I angry because I personally will benefit if I am able to exact whatever punishment my zeal will let me accomplish in this situation? Am I willing to stand up for the coworker? Or do I only stand up when the boss is mean to me? Am I willing to blow the whistle when it can help me get a promotion? Or do I blow the whistle even at my own career status because it is the right thing to do? Zeal is absolutely the heart of Judaism. We are meant to fire up our souls, to be passionate for Torah and what God has asked us to do in the world. But we are still human, and we are still subject to those cognitive biases, those predispositions, and those blind spots within our psyche that will often twist our passion into being self-serving. And by doing so, we perpetuate the narrative that people are only passionate when it suits themselves. And that means when people are legitimately passionate for things that are worthy of being passionate about, that have no self-interest, it becomes easier to ignore them. It becomes easier to discredit passion if we allow passion to be dominated only by self-serving interest. On the other hand, if we are individuals of whom no one can say, he's always out for himself. She's always doing that to get attention for herself. She's always complaining when it matters to her, but never for anyone else. If we are not that kind of person, if we are the opposite, if people say, he doesn't do much for himself, but man, if someone else needs him, he is there like a bulldog on that person's side. She's never fetching when it's bothering her, but if she sees someone else bothered, she will go to town on whoever's causing the trouble. Then people take that much more seriously. We have to be advocates for others if we want to actually overcome even what is bothering ourselves. We have to be strong when others need us to be strong, and they will be strong for us. Zeal is at the heart of what Judaism tells us to be, because zealousness is something that shows that we believe this world can be more, should be more, will be more. But we have to make sure that it is the proper form of zeal. Too easily it turns into a mob. Too easily it turns into a hateful group banging on drums for their own benefit. But it doesn't have to be. The Torah has shown us what it can be. It's up to us to make sure we choose each time. Shabbat Shalom.